Before I begin, I'm kind of stuck here because of the production and all the rest of it. So I'll just be in this space and wander just a tiny bit. Before I begin my formal talk about creative intelligence, I wanted to put up this image. That's me in 1979 in a cab with a woman coming into New York City to start our lives together. She's gorgeous, and she's looking straight ahead into the camera, excited to be in the big city. He's kind of cute, all facial hair and all, and you know, he's looking at her. He's excited to be with her. The big city beckons her. It engages her. There's a powerful erratic pull and engagement between her and the city. And later I'm going to be talking about user engagement as a better, more powerful idea, concept than user experience. But I wanted to, start off with an example of the most powerful of engagements, which is love, or maybe lust. I'm not quite sure. We're still together in New York City and having a good time. So let me begin with VUCA. We know we're living in a period of cascading change, and I like the term VUCA because it's kind of a military term, and it represents volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. This is our life today. We know this is our life. It's our private life, our career, our job, our industry. It's VUCA. And VUCA makes us want to scream. And it makes us want to scream and do something, do anything. And the real question is, in our life, what do we do? And here's a hint. Frank Knight is a founder of the Chicago School of Economics. And he has a suggestion for us. The chief thing which the common sense individual actually wants is not satisfaction for the wants which he or she has, but more and better wants. More and better wants. Higher order wants. And I like this quote because wants are not needs. They're not needs or unmet needs. Wants are aspirations. Wants are dreams. A couple of years ago, I was in India, a part of a Dream-In conference. That's what it was called, where thousands of people were interviewed by hundreds of design and business students as to what their dreams were. And I wanted to sort of begin this with a little clip from that conference. This was a fascinating conference for me. We collated the thousands of dreams into various categories, and we're actually in the process now of setting up a site for crowdfunding and venture capital to turn some of these dreams into either business plans or plans to execute. But what was really interesting was the dreams themselves. The 4 top dreams that came out of this, again, after talking to thousands of Indians in small villages and towns in vernacular, not necessarily in English, in local languages, the 4 most common dreams were starting a business, serving the nation in the military or the police, women's rights, and more education. At the very, 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 very bottom were more food, or better water, or housing, the things that we would normally associate with what people need. If you ask people about their needs, they'll give you a list. And if you ask them in the morning, they'll give you a list. If you ask them in the evening, they may give you a different list. If you ask them about their dreams, they'll tell you 1, maybe 2. Dreams are really powerful. They are higher order wants. And I think that's what we should be focusing on. I think the key issue before us is knowing what is truly meaningful to people, understanding these higher order wants. And the key challenge ahead of us is fulfilling these higher order wants, these aspirations and these dreams. So lately I've been traveling around hawking my book, Creative Intelligence, to audiences at Google and Microsoft and all over the place. I ate whale in Norway for the first time. It was actually quite tasty. They toasted it up for me. And I have as a result of being on the road for about 6 months now, I have a pretty good idea of the models that organizations, businesses are using. And I wanted to go through these models with you and then challenge some of the models with some new ideas and provide another model that I think can lead us into satisfying higher order needs. So let me get right into it. I've structured it in a provocative way. I'm calling them the dogmas of design instead of the models of design. And I think it works, after lunch and this and that. But they are deliberate provocations, so don't throw anything at me, okay? So here we go. The gift dogma, dogma as a gift. I think this model of innovation is really the favorite of tech companies and consumer goods companies, corporations with strong engineering and chemistry foundations. It frames a design as a gift from really smart people who invent cool stuff and throw it over the wall to consumers. Along the way, designers and marketers get a chance to humanize and prettify the technology, but basically it comes from really smart people and it's tossed at the marketplace. And those who like it, that's cool, and those who don't, well, too bad. And I've had engineers and researchers say, people really don't know what they want until we give it to them. And for the longest time, I thought that was an outrageous thing to say. But for a lot of the time, it's absolutely true. If you look at the biggest innovations that have changed our lives over the last couple of years, like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Zipcar, Match.com, Method, whatever it is, most of them have come from young entrepreneurs who embody the values and knowledge of their generation. And they succeed by mining the existential wants of their generation, of their cohort group, and give as gifts new products and services and experiences to members of their generation or their cohort group. And again, the rest of us can go along or not. And I think the gift model actually works really well when you yourself embody the values of the person you're gifting, right? But as Valentine's Day shows, that even when you think you know the other person, sometimes your chances of success aren't that great. And the further away you go from giving a gift to someone who does not embody your values and knowledge, the lower the chance of your success. Here's a good example, Google Glass. You know, every engineer I know thinks this is terrific. Pretty much everyone who's under 25 that I know thinks it's really great. And frankly, I would love to play with it myself. But there are lots of people out there who just look at this and see this as an invasion of privacy and wonder, you know, what are you taping or what are you looking at? And I think the further away you go in terms of generation in this case, and perhaps culture, from what you embody as an engineer, as a Google person, the lower the chance will be that this gift will be successful. Okay. Thinking dogma, design as a process or design thinking, is another model. The thinking dogma flips the gift model around and starts with user needs first, and then goes on to finding the technology and the innovation to fulfill them. This is a huge advance. Now, I remember when I first started writing about this at Business Week, this was revelation. You know, the thinking dogma expanded the application of design from aesthetics and physical products to include services and experiences. It was a huge advance. The thinking dogma, you know, has taken design into whole new areas of strategy and branding, as well as new markets, health care and education, and maybe even government. Just by making people, not technology, central, the thinking dogma has transformative powers. Yet it has some limitations. We've learned that brainstorming 100 or 1,000 new ideas doesn't really or often lead to originality of significance. Sometimes connecting just 2 or 3 ideas really leads to disruptive innovation. And focusing on meeting the unmet needs of consumers and people is often not that meaningful to people who have higher order wants and aspirations and dreams. And the process methodology itself that's so central to the design dogma, design thinking dogma, and which makes it so attractive to corporations who are really involved in process, that often leads to, at best, incremental change as opposed to disruptive innovation and creativity. So look at this number. To me, this was a devastating number. It comes out of a report by the NSF and the Census Bureau. Only 9% of all U.S. public and private corporations do any kind of innovation, any kind of service or product innovation. It's stunning and totally scary that after all these years of talking about design thinking, and all the years of practice, only 9% of U.S. corporations do any kind of innovation. So we need to do more. Let me go on to a third model of design, the design of doing good. Design is helping, which is totally hot. You know, I teach at Parsons, and social innovation, the dogma of doing good, is captivating most of my students. And even in business schools, this dogma is really, really, really important to people, as it should be. It frames design as helping, using the principles and tools of design to help poor people in Asia and Africa and Latin America, hugely popular. And it's important because it breaches the wall between profit and nonprofit, between market and non-market, between philanthropy and commerce. Social innovation is transforming how we think about both capitalism and charity, even as it delivers, you know, clean water and food and housing to those who need it. This is all very good. It also has a few limitations. Who determines what these needs are? The giver or the recipient? And how do you scale their delivery? Scale is hugely important and a vital issue within this dogma of doing good. And what is meaningful to people anyhow? What is meaningful to people? And who determines that? What do they really dream about? And also, why does so much of the dogma of doing good, designers helping, take place outside America, outside the US, as opposed to here? Now, these are all, I think, significant questions that revolve around a very, very important model of design. So I'd like to suggest now a couple of concepts that have come out of my teaching at Parsons that are additions to and challenges to some of our prevailing thoughts about what is design, and what are the design models. And then I'll use that to sort of reconstruct and come up with another dogma of design. Okay. So I just did this old dogma and new dogma just because I'm doing dogmas today, okay? One of the basic concepts that are really important to us all is experience, right? We're really into the experience economy and designing experiences, and I think that's all great, except that the idea of an experience is very passive. You know, we experience something. It sort of happens to us. Or we design something so that other people can then experience it, okay? I think that today we're much more active and much more participatory in everything in our life, and particularly in design. We are engaged in everything. We're involved in making our identity in the social media aspects of our lives. We want to participate and engage. And much of the business model of today involves engagement. If you listen to Zuckerberg talk about Facebook, all he talks about these days is engagement and how to measure engagement. How to measure engagement, how to assess engagement. Engagement is the new hot thing. And the only metric so far that's come up that measures engagement is time spent. And I think we really need to do a much better job of understanding what engagement means and assessing it. It involves aura. It involves the power, the beckoning, the pull, the emotion. It also involves the time spent, but it means what we're doing while we're engaging. What we're doing while we're engaging. I don't know how to assess any of those things or measure them, but I think that's one of the great challenges that's going on today as we begin to shift from the consumer experience to the consumer engagement. And I think the economy itself is shifting from a tech-driven, experience-driven economy to an engagement-driven economy. I think this is something that we're just beginning to see. So I like these are new ideas, and I'm sticking with them. Consumer. We've all been brought up with, you know, focus on the consumer. It's a consumer-driven economy, all the rest of it. Increasingly, it's not the individual consumer that's involved. It's a community of people. It's a relationship. If you're a company that's selling something these days, whether it's a product or service, you need to be involved in that community, participate in that community, help that community and the individuals involved in that community to make their lives better. So what you're selling into, what you're seeing in society today is not the individual consumer that's driving things. It's more of a constellation of communities, of people engaging with one another and with corporations or nonprofits that make up, that constitute our society and our business community. So I think consumer is great. It's a building block. I think community is a concept that we have to begin to get used to in a business sense. Needs and wants. We sort of talked about needs and wants. I'm going to skip that. Empathy and meaning. You know, we all discuss the need for empathy in understanding cultures and so understanding the other. And I'm all for that. But the fact of the matter is empathy is just the beginning. It's an attitude. It doesn't give you the meaning. It opens you up and tells you you've got to go find it. But you've got to go find it. And it's the meaning that's important, not your attitude. Okay? So I like meaning better than empathy. I think it's richer and deeper. Story and narrative. The concept of story is critical to us in design. We've been using it for the longest time, and it's very important. However, stories are, they're true and they're false. They're deep and they're shallow, and they're all over us. There are a million stories that are being shot at us through advertising. Narrative, however, is something different. A narrative gives us a context for meaning. It allows us to take our new data or ourselves or what have you and put it into a larger tableau. A narrative takes us someplace. I think it's richer and more powerful than story. So I like narrative better than story. Brainstorming, we've talked a little bit about. Connecting dots, I'll talk a little bit more about. Big data and deep culture. We're really on the riding the wave of big data, and it's starting, and you hear it all over the place. And I think big data is important. I think at times it can be predictive, but big data without cultural context is like looking at the shadow on the wall. You're looking at transactions that people are making and reading into those transactions meaning without actually going into their culture to see what is meaningful to them. I think understanding the culture itself directly through anthropology and sociology is absolutely essential to understanding what's going on. And big data without deep culture is actually dangerous. So those are my thoughts on that. Fail fast, fail often. I really hate fail fast, fail often. I think it's a really West Coast kind of thing. Most of the people I know and most of the businesses I know, well, you fail fast and fail often, you're a failure. The fact of the matter is I think it's a very techie kind of thing. It is a very software kind of thing, and maybe it works there, but it's very lazy. The fact is you have to do your research. You have to do your, deep culture, your knowledge mining, as I call it. You've got to put the time in, or you have to mine what you embody. And then you go out and do your trying, your attempts. Failing fast and failing often is actually a way of shortcutting all of this. And I don't like it. And I don't think it's a really good research methodology. So that's how I feel about that. Let's see, R&D and marketing. What I'm trying to get here with the old dogma, still up there? What I'm trying to get here is that traditionally this is how it works in a corporation. You have R&D, and that's where your creativity is. And then when you come up with a new idea, you sort of pass it along in a linear fashion to marketing, and they decide whether there's a market for it or not. And then if there is a market for it, they'll pass it on to design, and they'll prettify it, and then they'll get it out into the marketplace. And that's sort of how it works. And that's how it works at a lot of companies. I think there's a much better way, and a way of reframing this, which is and if you look at the history of companies like Hewlett-Packard and IBM, as well as new startups today, you'll find pockets of creativity. I call them magic circles. Sometimes it takes place in a laboratory. Sometimes it takes place in a business team. You'll find magic circles of creativity happening in an organization. And that's where the creativity happens. And then you will find people who I call, I don't know, you could call them curators, you could call them general managers or coaches or wanderers, I call them in the book, which is a terrible name. I'd never do that again. These are folks who, they curate creativity. They are the experts. They are the people who can look at the different creativities in the organization and decide what really works for them, or what would really work in the marketplace, or what would really work for the organization. And they provide the financing and marketing. They scale. They scale. So my image, which I didn't put up here, my image for creativity and innovation in a large organization is to have lots of little circles connected via network to a few wanderers or curators who are able to screen these creativities and then provide the resources for scaling them and go from creativity into creation and then into capitalism. You know, on a different level, Peggy Guggenheim was a great curator of Jackson Pollock, right? Gallery owners, museum coaches who go out and spot talent and then bring them to the big time. We have them in our lives all over the place. We don't identify it as such. But I think this model, which is a more network model of creativity, is a better model than the old dogma of linear funnel type of innovation. So that's my thought. And then finally, finance capitalism, Kickstarter capitalism. We'll talk a little bit about Kickstarter capitalism later, but I think we are seeing really great transformations of our economic system away from transactional marketplace capitalism, where people buy a product and that's it, or buy a service and that's it. We're seeing a much more, how do I put it, relational system, where if you're on Kickstarter, crowdsourcing, if you're starting a new company, San Francisco or New York or Minneapolis, you're seeing a different set of values, sharing values, a different set of roles of people being both investors and consumers. They're being the audience and they're being participants. There's something very different going on that I think we all have to be aware of, and I think it's fundamental. And I talk a little bit about that in my book, and we could talk about that a little bit later as well. So these are some of the ideas that have been cooking with me, and I've put them all together, and I've sort of packaged them into a new dogma, and I'm calling it the dogma of creative intelligence. And I'm taking design out of the process framework and putting it more into a social movement framework, where it always should be, and should have been there from the very beginning. And I have 5 competencies: knowledge mining, framing, playing, making, and scaling. So let's go through them, okay? Knowledge mining. I think most of the people in this room really are in the mining business. You're mining the existential in life in search of what is meaningful to people. Branding, for example, is really simply the commodification of meaning, understanding meaning and commodifying it in a big, larger than life level. So I think our goal is to prospect for meaning, and when we find it, we mine it. So where do we prospect for meaning? And again, looking around at the innovations over the last 20 or 30 years that have changed our lives, what do we find? We find people who are connecting 2 or 3 dots. It's really very simple. 2 or 3 dots of knowledge, of technology, and combining them into something really radically different. So I have a game I play with my class and sometimes in consulting where connect some dots and see what you come up with. So I'm going to do this now. What do you get when you connect the dots of selling books, cheap prices, and new online technology, right? What do you get when you connect listening to music, the value of sharing, and your generation's social media technology? Spotify. It's not that difficult, and it's not even that complex. What do you get? I'm getting all this from the movie, so forgive me. What do you get when you connect looking for girls, sharing, and social media? Right? You get Facebook. But you can play the same thing, the same game for Airbnb. Just think about the dots that you're connecting for Airbnb. You're connecting a new sharing value system, your couch, and basically a new online technology. That would be Airbnb. And you could do the same thing for Warby Parker or Zappos or, I don't know. What you can't yet do is to do this for healthcare or education or government, but you can see how we can get there using this simple connecting of dots. But most of these dots have been inside a new generation, a younger generation. They've been embodied by people, and very often not even, formally interpreted that way. They just did it that way. And what I'm trying to do here is to say, wait a minute. We should recognize the knowledge that we embody as a generation, as a gender, as a culture, as a group, recognize what we embody, and then use that. That is very powerful knowledge that we can mine, okay? And of course, we're all aware of the other kind of knowledge mining, which is immersion. Going out and doing your 10,000 hours of immersion in a culture and coming up with, the deep meaning in the higher order ones in that culture. And we can do that. You could also do that instead of 10,000 hours. Sometimes you can do that in 10 or 15 minutes. Well, let me play this clip for you. Okay. So, this is my goddaughter, Zoe. She was 4. It was the summer before last when I did this, out at the beach, and her parents were off, having fun, and she was playing with me. And she got really bored really fast. And you know how dangerous that can be when a 4-year-old girl gets really bored with you? So what do, right? Now I'm teaching at Parsons these days, and half of Parsons is a fashion school. And I've learned an awful lot at the fashion school, and one of the things that I've learned there is that all the great runway shows are on YouTube, okay? All of them, over the last, 10 years or 15 years. And so I took out a couple of runway shows and started showing them to Zoe and one of them I showed her was Alexander McQueen, one of his early shows. And if you haven't looked at Alexander McQueen's early runway shows, they're incredible and probably a little bit too raunchy for a young girl. But anyhow, she watched these shows for maybe, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And that was the result, okay? She got runway culture. Her walk was wonderful. It was a runway. Her face, her expressionless face, she got that. And then the flip, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. And this took all of 10 or 20 minutes. So, yeah, immersion is really important, but sometimes you can do it in a very, very brief manner if you're open to it and creative. And Zoe is really open. She's a kid, right? And they are the most open and perhaps the most creative. So that's one way of doing immersion, and it's a little different than what we're used to. Then there's a traditional kind of immersion, which takes thousands of hours, and I think is also very important. This is a picture of Chinese Game Boys, right? And it's from research that was done by Ziba for Lenovo a couple of years ago. And I want to just deconstruct what it takes to do this kind of immersion, right? Now Ziba, some of you know Ziba, it's a great design and innovation firm out of Portland. It has about 100 people in Portland. Now of the 100 people in Portland, there are 62 areas of expertise among those 100 people. Anthropologists, cognitive scientists, color specialists, information architects, whatever. And on this research that they did for Lenovo, and the research was called Search for the Soul. Search for the Soul. Talk about looking for what is meaningful in a society. Search for the soul. Ziba sent 12 researchers around China for 3 months, 205 days or about 5,000 hours, gathering and analyzing data and formulating personas, the stuff that we do for these different types of tribes. Personas. That's really great immersion, and that is knowledge mining. They were really mining this particular segment of the culture for Lenovo. It's fascinating. So I think knowledge mining is a very, very powerful creative competence, and I like it a lot. Here's another one. Framing and reframing. We're hearing more and more about it. When I first heard it a couple of years ago, I thought, whoa, That's really revolutionary. My wife is a linguist, so she has been talking about it for the longest time. And it comes out of linguistics, sociolinguistics. And I thought, wow, this is really powerful stuff. I ought to bring it into design and creativity as a main process, as a main competency. And I think there are two types of framing and reframing. There's narrative framing, which is how we interpret information, how we, our narrative, the idea that we frame it, and we can reframe it. We can reframe our story. We can reframe our narrative. For example, I just got back from visiting my mom in Florida. She's 95. And to her, medicine, the frame of medicine is very clear. Medicine is all about disease and cures. That's her frame of medicine, right? But I bet for most of us, certainly for me here, medicine is reframed. Medicine for me is all about well-being and maximizing my abilities, maximizing my ability to do whatever I want at this stage in my life, at any stage in my life. It's a really different frame. Here's another frame and reframe. A conventional frame for innovation is that innovation is all about technology and functions, right? If you reframe it, as Steve Jobs did, and actually Sony did before him, innovation is about enabling. It's about tools. It's about connecting. It's about belonging to a larger ecosystem or a family. That's a major reframe of innovation. It makes it wildly more accessible to people. And it changes the way you design innovation. I still remember my first VCR with 100 different buttons. It drove me crazy. I put it on the cover of Business Week. And now it's very, very different because innovation has been reframed, but not entirely. There are still tons of things that come out that are completely complex, but it's because engineers love to think of innovation in terms of technology and functions. Okay, so a second type of framing and reframing is engagement framing and reframing. And again, it used to be that we were born into our social relationships. We were born into most of our engagements in life. That's no longer true. We are creating, because of social media, thousands of engagements all the time, and they're all somewhat different. I mean, this is a weird kind of engagement, right? We hardly ever do this, and I would never do this in a million years, but this is the space and this is the time, so we're having this engagement. An hour from now, we will have a completely different engagement. 2 hours from now, I'll be drinking, and maybe some of you, and we'll have a different engagement. But we can frame and reframe that. And once we understand that we can frame our engagements, and we have more and more tools to do that, we can reframe them. It gives us enormous power in terms of design and creativity and innovation. So I'm going to play a little clip from a movie, one of my favorite movies, Zero Dark 30, that talks about framing. Now, Zero Dark 30 really got robbed at the Academy Awards, and so this is one of my ways of payback. I'll play it, and then I'll talk a little bit about, I'll deconstruct it a little bit in terms of framing and reframing, okay?
What else have you done for us besides Bin Laden?
I've done nothing else.
The movie takes you behind the scenes on the decade-long hunt that led to finding the world's most dangerous man.
I want to make something absolutely clear. There's nobody else coming to the rescue. There was just us.
No one really knows what it's like to disappear into the shadows as a CIA operative in that part of the world.
I need a favor.
Why I should help you? How come you only call me when you need help?
How about a V10 Lamborghini?
I just need a phone number.
There were a lot of people across the world involved in the hunt for Bin Laden.
We're within 10 meters of it. He's here somewhere.
We couldn't capture every aspect of that, but we tried to capture the scope.
He's called from 6 different payphones from 2 different cities, never using the same phone twice.
The Al-Qaeda operative's behavior was so specific and designed to avoid detection that it led the CIA to them.
He's living in a city. You can't run a global network of interconnected cells from a cave.
Okay, so why do I love this clip so much? Before Maya came along, before the analyst came along, the narrative frame, the CIA's narrative frame of Osama bin Laden was that he was somewhere in a cave in an inaccessible area. There was no way to get him, okay? And their engagement frame with him was, well, since we can't get him, you know, the only thing we should be doing, the only thing we can do, is engage with the suicide bombers that he sends out to kill us and stop them. That was those were the two frames of narrative and engagement of the CIA. And for 10 years, they couldn't get him. Maya comes along, and she says, wait a minute. You know, this guy is running a global organization, you know, based on information. He can't really be in an inaccessible cave. He's most probably in a city. Start looking for him in a city. And she also said, your engagement frame is you know, if he's running a complex organization, global organization based on data, you know, he needs people to be bringing him data. He's not going to be using a cell phone because that'll bring a drone right down on his head. So look for people who are bringing him, look for couriers who are bringing him information. So she changed the engagement frame of the CIA. By changing those two frames, they got Osama, okay? And it was all due to her changing the CIA's frame. It's very powerful and very simple. But it took someone like Maya, who was, and then, you know, you have Goldofino, who is the head of the CIA, sort of interrogating her, saying, well, who are you? Right? So you have this big hulking guy, right, Mr. CIA, looking at this female analyst saying, who are you and why should we listen to you? And her answer is, you know, I'm the person who's been studying this for 10 years. That's all I've been doing. That's who I am, buddy. And the lesson here is all about patterning. She knew the patterns of behavior of Al-Qaeda. She knew what existed, what was there, and she was able to spot what was odd, what wasn't there. And in the analysis, in this little clip, she's talking about, you know, people calling from cell phones, from public phones in different cities, right? Not using cell phones. That was really odd. Very odd. It didn't fit the picture. It was the odd duck. It was what was different. I call it donut thinking in my book. You know the patterns. You have spent 10 years, your 100,000 hours of immersion. You really know the patterns, and you know what doesn't fit. You know what doesn't fit. So I really like that part of it also. And finally, there's a guy, you know, he's talking to his informant, and he's asking for a cell phone number, and he offers him a V10 or D10 Lamborghini. I love that. You know, he didn't offer the guy money or sex or Mercedes. He offered him something that was meaningful. Somehow he found out it was a V10 Lamborghini was meaningful to him in his culture, and he offered it to him, and he got the cell phone number, right? It was all fascinating. So framing and reframing are really very, very powerful competencies and tools. Very simple language. We kind of do it intuitively, but I think bringing it out and making it a formal competency is very powerful. So that's framing and reframing. Okay. Playing. Now, I don't think she's here, but some years ago, Chi Perlman put on a great conference called Serious Play, and it really affected me. I'd never thought of play as a substitute, a better substitute for problem solving. Okay? But it is. In a world where you don't know the problem, and not every challenge has a right answer, the process of play and serious play is often a better methodology of design and creativity, for design and creativity, than problem solving. And so I like the idea of play as central to creativity. And of course, play in terms of education, has always been central to creativity in Montessori and blocks and progressive education. So I like play, and I think serious play is a very powerful way of dealing with uncertainty and of generating creativity. And it's certainly better than fail fast and fail often. So let me tell you a little story about the Tetra Pak as a way of showing you how powerful play can be. You all know kind of the origin of Tetra Pak. I guess it goes back to the 50s and 60s. Came out of Sweden. It was a revolution at the time. You can provide, liquids and nutrients that didn't need to be refrigerated all around the world. I mean, talk about a breakthrough, right? But the Tetra Pak itself was designed for the moment, and at that moment, people drank sitting down in a room, right? These days, people aren't doing much of anything in a room except listening and engaging the way we are. They're walking around. They're on their cell phones. They're eating, walking around. They're mobile, and they're drinking in a mobile way as they go. And the traditional Tetra Pak wasn't really designed for that. It spills, and it's hard to hold. And actually, the plastic bottle or the can tends to be a lot better vehicle for holding liquids as you're on the go. So, and here's just a brief little example of kids with their plastic bottles. So Tetra Pak has been losing market share in areas around the world where people are just doing things mobily. And they decided, well, we got to redesign the thing, right? And they wanted to do it in-house, of course, and they spent years trying to do it without a whole lot of success. And then they decided, well, let's go outside, and they hooked up with Continuum, used to be known as Design Continuum, dropped the design, a Boston-based innovation and design consultancy, one of the best, really great stuff. And they decided not simply to hire Continuum to do a project and give them a book at the end of it in terms of what they should do. They decided to hire Continuum and play with them through the whole process. And again, let me just emphasize this. I use the concept play deliberately. Serious play requires at least two conditions. Players who trust each other enough to engage in the game for a long period of time, and players who are willing to accept an unexpected outcome. Players who are willing to accept an unexpected outcome. All right. So Harry West, who was the CEO of Continuum until recently, told me that the Tetra Pak people infiltrated us. They didn't just hire us. They came and joined with the Continuum people in doing the research around the world. They traveled with us. They worked with us in our project rooms. They drank with us. They did the prototyping. Here's a little video of Harry doing some playing.
Go. Did you drink anything?
Yep.
Go. Go for it. Oh, it's not under.
This is how you do research in the real world, right? So, and Harry did this, and the Swedish engineers did this, and they did this all around the world. Not Harry drinking all around the world, but other people drinking all around the world. And so, what did they find? Suck, pour, pull, right? People drink in three different ways, and this is especially true when they drink as they walked. When you think about it, just take a moment and think about how you drink a bottle of water or something. Some people put their lips all around, the circle, and they suck it down. Other people don't even touch the bottle, right? They don't even touch. I was in Kerala recently, and people drinking water all the time, they just poured it down their throat, never touched their lips. I tried doing that and got it all over my shirt. That has huge benefits in terms of sanitation, right? And then most others, and I think most Americans do this, they sort of put their lips around the bottom part of the bottle and they kind of draw it in. The way you drink, whether you suck, pour, or pull, has enormous consequences in terms of design. You know, where your nose goes on the box depends a lot on the way you drink. The flow of water, the amount of water flowing through the space, varies according to whether you suck, pour, or pull. It's fascinating stuff, right? And all this was discovered by playing together. And then, what about the solution? One of the constraints that the Tetra Pak Swedish engineers put on the design outcome at the very beginning was that whatever they come up with as a solution to their problem or their challenge, it had to be on top, because the spout had always been on top of the pack. Right? That's, at the very beginning, this was the way it's supposed to be. So we had to change whatever happened, it had to be on the top. But as they did the research and as they played together, they came up with an unexpected outcome, that the best solution, the best outcome to sucking and pouring and pulling while you're walking was to go over the crease. Whoa. Now, you know, to me, not a big deal. To Swedish engineers who've been used to putting the solution on top for 50 years, right, 60 years, this was revolutionary. And in the end, it was accepted. It was accepted because the Swedish engineers of Tetra Pak had been along all the way through. They had played with the Continuum people all the way through the process. They were there all the way through the process, and in the end, they accepted that the best outcome was to put this thing over the crease. And now they're putting it into production, and they're rolling it out, and I suspect it's going to be one of these billion-dollar product changes. And I think it came about because of the process of serious play. If they had not been along, if the Swedish and Tetra Pak people had been outside and had been presented with this solution, they would have been far less likely to have accepted it. Okay, so serious play is a very important creative competency. Making is another important creative competency. For years, we have seen, certainly in industrial and product design, a drift away from making toward strategy, toward branding. Design thinking took us away from the making of things. And I was a champion of that for a long time. And it always made me a little uncomfortable. But the revival of our making culture, which is so apparent all over the place these days, certainly on both coasts. You know, the advent of new low-cost 3D printing, you know all this. 3D printing, social media, and the change in values. There has been a big change in the value system for hyper-local, made in America, made by the guy or the girl down the block. This is changing the making of making. There's a huge revival in the value of making and the importance of making and the learning from making. So I think we need to re-embrace making. Also, my experience at Parsons, you know, the fashion school, fashion designers never left the making. While some of us drifted away from it into strategy and branding, the materiality in fashion, they never left that. It was always a major part of fashion. And it was a great reminder of the importance of making in design. So making is hugely important. And finally, scaling. I talked a little bit about that earlier. Scaling is something that, you know, as designers, as creators, we focus on the origination of the idea or the concept, not the implementation of it. And actually, there's a very different skill set for scaling than creating. But as part of the actual making of things, the creating of things, and certainly the business sense, you have to scale the creativity for it to have any economic value. And scaling, again, is something we don't necessarily think about, but we need to think about it. And the more we think about it, the more we think about how we integrate creativity with scaling so that we have the actual creation of things and the generation of economic value, I think the more valuable we become as designers. So I think scaling is the fifth creative competence that I talk about in the book, and hugely important. And actually, some of us are better at scaling. We're better scalers. We're better curators. We're better at identifying the kind of creativity that's important for our organization and providing them with resources than we are at actually being creative in that sense. And they're both very valuable. And recognizing the importance of these different roles and different skills is hugely important. So I want to end on this. Kickstarter. Kickstarter, I think, is the most important innovation in capitalism in 100 years. It is changing the way we scale on a very fundamental basis. It's changing the way we make things on a very fundamental basis. I think it's changing the economic system. Last year, they did $300 million worth of investment in new products and books and this and that. This year, it'll be $500 million. They've just sort of passed the regs for the Jobs Act, which will open up crowdsourcing and crowdfunding on a massive scale. The way we scale, the way we make products and develop products is changing fundamentally. And it's something that we all really need to be part of. I really recommend getting into Kickstarter or Indiegogo or any of the crowdfunding, either as a participant, put in your 10 or 25 bucks and go along for the ride, or actually start your own project. A third of my students are on Kickstarter. This is crazy. My generation grew up believing money was evil. And now we have design students wanting to be entrepreneurs, or at least people who are making what they're creating. This is hugely significant. It's the democratization of creativity. And I think we need to all be involved in it. So I'm going to leave it off here with Kickstarter. Is there another slide? Yeah. Here's another, just some new ideas that are part of this. And end this presentation now. These are my thoughts. This is what's in the book. I think the language that I used was deliberately non-designy. And I'm hoping that that kind of language is more accessible to a business community and society at large. I think a lot of the processes are very much design, but the verbiage, the language is not. And we could talk about the use of creativity rather than design. It could have been called design intelligence. But I'm trying to open it up to a wider audience. And I'll end on that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.